even the most stubborn of Kings fans like myself can admit that the Phoenix Suns are the team to beat in the Pacific Division. Maybe the entire Western Conference, maybe the entire NBA. But are the Kings the biggest threat out of the Pacific Division teams to upend the Suns in the playoffs? On today's podcast, Lina Washington, formerly covering the Sacramento Kings here in Sacramento for ABC 10, now covers the Phoenix Suns and other Arizona sports as a sports reporter for 12 News Arizona. She joins me to discuss that and more right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all off-season long. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA and enter promo code LockedOnNBA for a free white tech hat with any purchase. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you that. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer for ABC 10 News. And my guest today used to work for ABC 10. Unfortunately for me, Lina Washington left 10 and went to move on to cover Arizona sports in her hometown before I became a part of the ABC 10 team. Really is my loss. But of course, I got to know Lina from the time that she spent here in Sacramento covering Sacramento sports, did an excellent job covering the Sacramento Kings. She does a phenomenal job putting her Phoenix Suns fandom aside. She really was deeply ingrained in Sacramento sports culture. She knows this fan base very, very well, knows this city very, very well. So I thought, I got to hit her up. I got to get her back on because I want to hear her thoughts first and foremost on the beam and the amazing run that the Sacramento Kings had last season. I know she enjoyed it, but also let's talk about a potential Kings and Phoenix Suns rivalry. And are the Sacramento Kings a true threat to the Phoenix Suns in the Western Conference? And I think you're going to be surprised and maybe a little pleased with Lina's answer to that, as well as a lot of my questions in this podcast today. So without any further ado, here is my good friend, Lina Washington. It has been far too long since we have had the pleasure of Lina Washington's company. Last time she was on the Locked On Kings podcast, she was here in Sacramento covering the Sacramento Kings as well as Sacramento sports. Now she is over back in her hometown. She's in Arizona covering, doing an amazing job covering Arizona sports for 12 News. And Lina, you're an Arizona girl. You're a Phoenix Suns girl, which I love. I absolutely can't wait to chat with you about that. But I know you had a strong connection and a strong appreciation for Sacramento fans and the Sacramento Kings fan base and covering this team for the years that you did. So what was your perspective, or how much did you enjoy, even with them being division rivals, how much did you enjoy the Kings' rise and the reemergence, I guess, of Sacramento last season?
Oh, man. Matt, first of all, it's great to see you again. You are crushing it at ABC 10 and on Locked On, of course, holding it down. It was super fun for me last season to see the resurgence and the national attention that the Kings and the fan base was getting. I mean, to see the pictures circulating of what Doco and outside Golden One Center looked like throughout the end of the season, the light the beam phenomenon, to see that recognized, like I was saying, this is what fans were doing for California Classic Summer League games, right? That's how dedicated this city, this community has been for years of irrelevance, of turmoil, of turnover. And so to see it all come together under Mike Brown, deserving of Coach of the Year, of course, was super fun for me. I was torn, of course, whenever they would match up with the Suns. I actually, shout out to Chris Kabatian, my friend in Sacramento and with the Kings. He actually gifted me tickets to the Kings and Suns game for my birthday. I got to take my now famous neighbor Bill to the game. And at the Suns' expense, I got to see the beam lit in person. So that was still pretty cool for me. I was secretly hoping for a Western Conference final featuring Sacramento and Phoenix. I put it in one of my hot takes on national podcast networks that the Kings were going to be in the Western Conference Finals, and they were very close, but they gave the Golden State Warriors, which was a series I selfishly also wanted to see, knowing the history of that area and the fan base and the community of the Bay Area and Sacramento, which are two separate markets and not in the same place, same region. But man, it was so fun to watch. And I was, yelling at my TV, watching it happen, hanging on to the very last minutes when I was in Denver covering the Suns series against the Nuggets. So it was super cool. And I'm just happy that people like you and Kevin John and Sean Cunningham and all the people who have covered this team for so long got to experience playoff basketball, because even me as a Suns fan, it had been a minute since we had been in the playoffs. So to arrive when I did, when they were clinching, the West and going on to the finals, and now everything that's happened since then in the 2 years that I've been here. And as a lifelong Suns fan, it's been really cool to be a part of and have a front seat for.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because it might not seem like it now to maybe Kings fans and others in the NBA from the perspective of look at the juggernaut that the Phoenix Suns have built and turned into, and that unbelievably talented starting five that they have. But compared to the rest of the Pacific Division, the LA empire that is the Lakers, the Clippers, who are trying to hold on, and they're still in LA, so they have the benefit of that. The Golden State Warriors dynasty. The Kings and the Suns have always kind of been the odd teams out in a lot of ways in that division. Now we're potentially looking at maybe the top two teams in the division. How are the Suns and Kings, whether it's fan base, organization, how do you see them? What similarities do you see between them?
It is going to be a super tough division to get out of. I mean, you just look at the talent from top to bottom at this stage, at this point, it's the parity might not necessarily be there anymore. And some people love seeing, dynasties formed, and we got that out of the Lakers, and we've seen that from the Warriors. And now you have teams like the Kings and the Clippers ending decades-long droughts to get to where they are now. And now the Suns are back to being a threat. And so it's going to be tough to get out of. I'm excited to see all the competition, hoping that the stars on all of these teams stay healthy, because, I mean, you talk about top billing marquee matchups, the names, the faces of the league. That's all there in the Pacific Division. So I will be having my popcorn ready for every matchup with every one of those teams, to cover the Clippers Suns series in the first round last season was super fun to watch as well. Russell Westbrook going vintage, Kevin Durant and Book together with CP3 also delivering a vintage performance in one of his final games as a Phoenix Sun. It was really cool to be a part of and watch up close and personal. And so I will be seated for all of those matchups. But the Kings are going to be a threat. This is the first time in probably some of these players' careers that they are going to have to fear playing Sacramento, not just in Sacramento, but in LA, in San Francisco, and in Phoenix, right? They get Phoenix in Sacramento, the third game of the year for the Suns. So that will be a good test. Usually those teams do meet up in one of the first couple games of the season. But now it's going to be nationally televised, which wasn't the case for many, many years.
Well, the Kings are the reigning Pacific Division champions. Not that that means anything. Right. It means something to us here in Sacramento, because we actually have banners up for it in the Golden One Center. I don't know if we're going to put another one up.
Joining the Monarchs up there in the rafters, right?
You got to have some kind of representation when you haven't won a championship since you've been in two towns ago or two relocations ago. Sure. But Lena, it's not surprising at all to me that the Phoenix Suns are labeled as the team to beat in the division, just with that lineup that they put together. It's just absurd. Adding Bradley Beal, of course, that already talented group. But it is a little surprising, little unfair, I think, that the Sacramento Kings are kind of pegged to be that worst team in that division. And of course, with the talent in the division, other teams adding stars, players getting better, the theory that the Clippers this year will stay healthy when years past they've not been able to. We'll see how that all plays out. But in your opinion, what team in there is the biggest threat to the Phoenix Suns, not just to win the division, because ultimately teams like the Suns, they're just trying to get to the playoffs and then win there. Same with the Golden State Warriors. But you think the biggest threat to, if they were to meet in the playoffs, this team could actually beat the Suns in a 7-game series?
That is a great question. I mean, we've seen the Suns beat the Clippers and beat the Lakers in the last 2 seasons in the playoffs. They haven't seen the Kings or the Warriors since that finals run. So I think those 2 teams, maybe just for the sake of not having seen them in the postseason, and maybe again taking a team like the Kings a little lightly because they are young and experienced. And then you have obviously the threat of Steph Curry in playoff mode any given night. Even in the postseason, he cranks it up, setting records, of course, at the Kings' expense last season, I should say. So I think either one of those teams could be the biggest threat to the Suns. To be honest with you, from my 3 seasons now of watching this team in postseason play, the biggest threat to the Suns in the playoffs might be themselves, because Devin Booker has failed to show up, unfortunately, in elimination games. He has had great postseason appearances, but he hasn't had a Steph Curry closeout performance. He hasn't had a Jason Tatum season on the line, dropping 50 in a closeout game. I mean, the Suns have been embarrassed on their home floor to end the season 2 years in a row. And that's not even counting the way that they fell apart in the 2021 series against the Bucks, where you can see Devin Booker looking around and famously just going, damn, we just let it slip. And so I think, to be honest with you, that might be the biggest threat to the Suns in the postseason. But they have a new coach, they have a new staff, they have some new pieces, including Chimezie Metu, who I got to do a little recon for when people were asking even how to pronounce his name or who is this guy. I said, he's physical. And, a moment that stood out to me even was when he and Jonas Valanciunas got into it, and he ended up, I believe, fracturing his hand over, a dirty play, arguably in the post. But you saw Chimezie was no punk, and you saw him kind of hold it down in this run to the postseason for this group. And what's been cool for me to see too is how this team is hanging out in the offseason with former assistant Rico Hines and his runs. You see Kevin Huerter, Davion Mitchell, Harrison Barnes out there. So to see how this team is kind of coming together in this way, even in the offseason, which wasn't necessarily the case before, I think is a good sign of things to come. And the maturity of De'Aaron Fox, if he just keeps on his upward trajectory, very cool to see him taste the postseason after all the work that he's done for this team and what he's had to endure, coaching changes, injuries, all of that. So I look forward to seeing the Kings continue this hopefully new era of being in the postseason in seasons to come.
Like I mentioned at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Birddogs. Look, Birddogs make you look good. Their stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. And they're shorts or pants that you could wear casually. Like, they're nice enough that you can take them to like a work setting on a casual Friday or something like that, or just wear that out and about. And it's not like a gym short look or anything like that. You look nice. You look the part. The khaki pants I highly recommend as well. But they also can dress you up pretty nice too, and they're versatile. I highly recommend wearing Birddog shorts or pants if you're going out golfing. Just a little trick that I've come up with. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of like a stiff, restricting cotton. And on top of that, Birddogs uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So if you're dealing with the hot summer, or you're dealing with the humidity that we have going on right now because of Hurricane Hillary, Birddogs can help you with that here in Sacramento. So go to birddogs.com/lockedonnba, enter promo code LOCKEDONNBA for a free white tech hat. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnba or promo code LOCKEDONNBA to get that free white tech hat. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you. Of course, we haven't seen what the new look Suns look like with the incorporation of Bradley Beal and the loss of Chris Paul, but I think expectations can be set pretty high for them. So there might not be, there's not a full confident way that you can completely answer this question without the context of seeing what this team looks like. But based off of your understanding of how the Suns played before the incorporation of Bradley Beal and how we believe the Sacramento Kings to play with that incredibly high-powered offense, one of the greatest we've ever seen statistically, what what do you think gives the Sacramento Kings any kind of edge over the Suns, or what is it about the Kings that you think is most threatening to a team like Phoenix with the talent that they have?
First thing that comes to mind is speed, right? They've got De'Aaron Fox out there running the point. I mean, the way Davion Mitchell plays defense and plays in transition, not to say that the Suns don't have that speed, but it will be interesting to see how it is run without CP3 being the floor general. We've seen point guard Book, and they have been successful with him carrying, taking the ball up the court. Then we've seen Bradley Beal, what he can do. So I'm interested to see how it all plays out. And given Frank Vogel is kind of known for his defense as a coach, that might have been a concern. I think there's no worry that they're going to be able to put points on the board at any given night with the lineup that they have. But I think speed will be the thing that the Kings will have an edge on this particular group. And of course, we have Eric Gordon, who's getting some playing time with DeAndre Ayton, winning winning for Team Bahamas in the pre-Olympic qualifying final. So they are already building chemistry between those two new teammates, right? And with the veteran leadership of Gordon, I think it'll be an interesting kind of combination moving forward. But yeah, I think it'll be just an interesting matchup any given night between these two teams. I hope that there might be some kind of rivalry brewing, of course, just given my history in both of those markets. But we'll see. Book and Fox going at it, trading blows, trading shots, and it'll be must-see TV.
Devin Booker has had his fair share of big moments too inside the Golden One Center. He's hit at least 2 game winners in the Golden One Center, if I can, or at least back-breaking shots that I just remember Devin Booker, just really truly arriving in the NBA with some of the moments he's had against the Sacramento Kings. But this has nothing to do with the Kings, but the Kings are going to see the Golden State Warriors a lot, especially early, 3 times before December. My hope is maybe the Kings can take advantage of the Warriors trying to incorporate Chris Paul a little bit. And we don't know if he's going to start, come off the bench, what that's going to look like. Based off your understanding of Chris Paul, watching him closely over the past couple of years, how do you think that's going to work with the Warriors?
Well, I think the main thing is his health and availability, even to be able to see how he operates with the Warriors. That's going to be another fun dynamic between him and Draymond and Steph, some big personalities, some very high basketball IQs and future Hall of Famers, right? All on one roster. But I will always be thankful for what CP3 did for this organization. He helped turn the tide for the Suns, and not to say that the Golden State Warriors need that. It's kind of like the rich getting richer in some ways. But he is, slowing down, right? That was a concern in the postseason, was the speed at which the Suns could move the ball up the floor against, you got Michael Porter Jr. and Nikola Jokic just doing what they do. So it will be interesting to see how they change their pace of play with CP3 and where he fits into Steve Kerr's plan. But any team that has CP3 gets better when he's on their team. That's statistically and historically proven. So that is going to be another just threat to watch out for in this new look Warriors roster.
Giannis Antetokounmpo had a really, really good quote after the Bucks were eliminated from the playoffs. He was asked if that season was a failure, and he responded, I thought, really, really well, explaining like you don't just fail if you fail to win the championship. It's not a failure of a season. There's context involved. Looking at the Phoenix Suns, I think the universal expectation, and I know I'm guilty of this, is this team is built to win a championship. And I don't know how much patience there is in Phoenix compared to around the league, but I'm curious, do you think there is like a expectation of this Phoenix Suns team has to win a championship this year? This is what they're built for? Or is time on their side a little bit? And of course, given the context, if they don't do it this year, they can do it next year type thing.
That's a great question, because I think there is a loss of patience in the sense that the Phoenix Suns fan community has tasted what it's like to be there, to be in that moment, to have it within your reach. And now thanks to Matt Ishbia, right? He wasted little time getting that Kevin Durant trade done. And once that happened, it was all systems go. Championship or bust, I don't know if that will necessarily be the case for this season. I think, yes, the expectations are higher than they've ever been with the talent that they have and the owner that's in place and the desire that he has to get this team over the hump. I think they can absolutely accomplish what's never been done here in the next 4 years. If Devin Booker is still a Phoenix Sun, which he should be, it sounds like he wants to be here forever, which is a great sign for, the organization that was not necessarily a destination for a little bit. It was, then it wasn't, and now it is again. And so I think as long as that mentality, that perception is here, I think this team, this organization has championship expectations, and the people in place, both on the court and in the front office, to achieve that. James Jones as general manager, also winning GM of, executive of the year in the last several seasons. So I think all the pieces are there. Will it be a failure if they don't accomplish it? I think in some ways, sure. For me personally, I'm not holding it to that standard. I think any step forward and progress is going to be progress. You get to the Western Conference Finals after the exits that have occurred at home in the last 2 seasons. That's a step forward. And I think that is what's most important for any organization, including the Kings, right? Obviously, every player and coach and executive has championship aspirations. But if a team like the Kings can end this drought and move forward in the postseason and continue to give teams a run for their money, I consider that success. I don't consider, anything short of a championship a failure for that organization. And the Suns and the Kings, Sacramento and Phoenix are in the same boat, where they're trying to hang a championship banner in their arenas for the first time.
Couple more that I got for you, Lena. You mentioned the Kings and Suns playing each other early on this season with the incorporation of Bradley Beal. Plus, Kevin Durant hasn't been a Sun very long, and people forget, unfortunately, he got injured. What was it, warming up before his debut? He got injured, so poor guy. So, I mean, the Suns, they need time. Every team needs time to get used to playing together and incorporating each other. So maybe for a team like the Sacramento Kings, they could view that as a potential advantage in an early matchup with the Suns before maybe they hit their stride come January, February. Do you expect, because of just the sheer talent on this Suns roster, that they'll be a great team and a threat right out of the gate? Or do you expect it to take a little bit of time?
I think they will be a threat right out of the gate. I mean, these are ballers. Like, they know what they're doing. You just put them on the court and they've played together, right? Kevin Durant and Book have won a gold medal in the Olympics together. DA, like I mentioned, has played with Eric Gordon. Like, DA and Book have played together for their entire NBA careers. They know each other. So I think maybe incorporating some of the system and schemes that Frank Vogel is bringing might be the learning curve for some of these players, because it might be just a different approach, right? Especially for a guy like DeAndre Ayton, who has been considered to have not reached his full potential, or his motor has been questioned. So how can Frank Vogel elevate that? And how will he respond? I think that's more of the intriguing part about the pieces that are in place. These guys, they can just score, drop 20 on any given night. Like I said, I mean, Kevin Durant is underrated on his defense. I think you saw that in his first couple of games. And I think he is itching to prove that he's him, right? Like, he can stay healthy. He puts a lot of pressure on himself. That was something that was interesting for me in my interactions and hearing him speak, is that he seems to understand that there are expectations of him, and he wants to live up to that pressure and deliver. And he's also just, any preconceived notions of him being ornery with the media, I and my colleagues here did not really experience that. So I think just finding a way to get it all to click together might be the only thing that this team might be challenged with in the early going.
Finally, Lena, what is the Phoenix Suns fan or Phoenix fans' perspective on the Sacramento Kings? Or do you hear, when you hear a Phoenix fan talk about the Kings, if they even do, is it, that team's not quite on our level yet, we don't have to worry about them? Is there a respect? Like, I don't know. I'm very curious because I think Sacramento is misunderstood outside of Sacramento, but also with the rise of national TV games and now a playoff series under their belt, you're hearing more people around the league going, oh, this Kings team's actually really fun and really good to watch.
Yeah, it's no longer like, the league pass team, right? It's the appointment television national televised team, not just the one game a season that they're obligated to show in game, 79 to 82 of the season, right? They are going to be on full display for the nation to see. It's funny because I get ribbed a little bit in the newsroom because I'll be excited for the Kings or former players or former coaches, or I'll just pull out my, encyclopedic knowledge of former Kings and people who played at Sacramento and whatever. And even going into, I think this season, one of the early games, I think it was when Harrison Barnes hit the game winner in Phoenix. It was this season or last season. But even after that, I had people in the newsroom saying like, Sacramento, we don't need to worry about them. Nobody cares about that team, kind of writing them off, discounting that team. Even in the Warrior series, it came back to, see, I told you the Kings weren't this and they weren't that. And I said, do you realize what it took for the Golden State Warriors to get past this team, right? What does that say about what they're building here? And the jealousy about the beam is real. Okay. We have people trying to figure out, well, what can we do in Phoenix? What won't be, what do we want? We had Raleigh Beach for some of the playoff runs, and I never really got to see that, but there's no real, beacon of hope and positivity and just something the fans can rally around in Phoenix. And there were talks about how can we get this, even, talking about the Deer District and, what happens outside Chase Center, how can we get this here? How can we bring this to Phoenix? First of all, it's 1,000,000 degrees when the Suns are in the playoffs outside. I can attest to having to stand outside for many a live shot before some games that didn't tip off until 7:00, right? So that might be a hindrance to rallying the fans like that. But there is envy about what is going on in Sacramento. I think there is still a lack of buy-in by people outside of maybe the state of California at large, who think that this team might be a threat, might be for real, might be on really the upswing consistently instead of falling short. And I will admit, I was that person who said, the Kings are great now, but just wait until after the trade deadline. Famously fall flat after the trade deadline. That didn't happen this year. So hopefully that trend continues for the sake of you guys out there covering this team and the fans who are trying to ring those cowbells into April, May, and June.
Well, if nothing else, Lena, that answer right there proves that you can leave Sacramento, but a little part of us you always take with you. You can't fully get rid of us, and you do a phenomenal job, of course, over there in Phoenix. Allow me to extend this olive branch. I think I'm okay to speak on behalf of Kings fans when it comes to the NBA opening night, Suns versus Warriors. I think we all know who we're rooting for in that game. Let's just say that we wouldn't mind a little slice of humble pie in the Warriors' faces from the Phoenix Suns on opening night. Maybe I'm speaking just for myself, but I think Kings fans can feel that. But I appreciate you so much for coming here on the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure. We have to do it again. I would love to be able to go to a game in Phoenix or for you to come back to Sacramento to see you again in person. But let's get a Kings-Suns rivalry going. That would be pretty fun in the Pacific Division.
Yeah, I'm here for it. Absolutely. Matt, continue doing what you do. I know Kings fans appreciate it. And yes, hopefully we will be seeing each other. You're welcome to come down to Phoenix anytime. I'm sure I'll be in Sacramento sometime in the next year or so.
Huge thank you to Lena for joining me here on the Locked On Kings podcast today. So good to see her. So good to talk to her. And I do hope that we can get a Kings and Suns rivalry going. I'm sure the Suns more have their eyes on teams like the Golden State Warriors, at least for a rivalry right now. But if you want to respond to anything that Lena and I discussed, please do so. You can reach me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Or, of course, if you're watching on YouTube, leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Lena is not the only guest that I have for you this week. In fact, I have 2 other podcasts planned with a pair of guests in each one. D'Lo and KC scheduled to join me later this week. We are going to talk about, like, if you could change a moment or moments that we could change from last season that would make things significantly better, or maybe even just minorly better for the Kings last year, what would those moments be? There's some obvious ones and some not so obvious ones that we will discuss. And then later on in the week, I'm going to be joined by two very good friends of mine, Frankie Cardicelli and Brendan Nunez. You should be very familiar with their coverage of the Kings. Also, they make frequent appearances here on the Locked On Kings podcast. We're going to do what I'm calling like the ultimate NBA expansion draft, where all three of us are going to have our expanded teams. We're going to draft our starting five, but the pool of players we can pick from is every player not in all 30 NBA teams starting five. So, for example, Malik Monk is available to be drafted, and you best believe one of the three of us are going to take Malik Monk probably early on in that draft. So we'll have a fun discussion about that. That's coming later on this week as well. So I hope you will join me for both those episodes and more. We're in the back half of August now. We're almost through the worst month of the year. Then we get into September. We still have some time to kill, but September means the start of training camp. We get to October, and that's the best month of the sports year period, and their Kings season will finally get going. So we still got a ways to go, but we're getting through it together. I appreciate your support as always. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of the Locked On Kings podcast. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.